We're back on Morning Line. Thanks for joining us on this Wednesday. Our guest is Clint Kelly, malpractice attorney. Good to have him on. If you want to join in, questions, we've had several already this morning, and you know the best thing about him is he'll tell you right off the bat, usually here, or you can talk to him later at his office if you have a case or not. And I know many of you are thinking about it now. Let's go real quick to the big news story.
News of the bizarre.
Yeah, I walked in, he was already taking notes.
Yeah.
And it's the news of the bizarre, but the thing that scares me is this probably happens more than any of us know, but it was revealed because, yet again, cameras are everywhere. I've had a colonoscopy. Okay, you reach a certain age, everyone has to go have them. It's a good preventative measure, very routine. And what happened with this guy for folks who missed this story, which did make national news?
It did. This man went into hospital in preparation for his colonoscopy and met with his anesthesiologist, which we all do before we have a surgical procedure. And apparently he was kind of a nervous guy, maybe a little bit difficult to speak to, and the anesthesiologist formed an opinion very early. She didn't like him.
For whatever reason.
This wasn't his first colonoscopy, and he knew that when they would give him the anesthesia, it would make his, dampen his memory. He couldn't remember what the doctors were telling him afterwards. So he had his cell phone with him, put his cell phone in the back of his pocket in his pants, and turned it on. And of course, he took his pants off.
Turned on the recording device.
Correct, on the phone, and it stayed with the bed where the surgery was done. I guess they wheeled him in the OR suite with his, his property right there under him. Anyway, long story short, once he's under the anesthesia and the gastroenterologist is doing the colonoscopy, this anesthesiologist starts making these snide remarks. First of all, one of the medical assistants saw a rash on the side of his body, and the anesthesiologist says it was syphilis, which is just a lie. Yeah. And just joking about it. And then she sits and looks at the medical assistant and says, "Oh, don't worry, that's just tuberculosis on his penis," which again was a lie. And by the way, that wound up in his chart, that he had a sexually transmitted disease, which he did not, because one of the medical assistants did not know that.
So that actually ended up on his chart. Okay, now that's all of a sudden, all right.
And then she said, she made some comment that I don't understand, where she said, "I'm going to punch you in the face and man you up during the procedure," because he was queasy when she put the needle into his arm when he was still conscious. And she made that comment to him. And then finally, I think the worst part about it was she just sat there and she said, just while she was doing it, she said, "You're just a retard."
Just a bunch of insults, one after the other.
After the procedure's open, she meets with him. By the way, she told the gastroenterologist, "You paged me 5 minutes into my conversation with this guy so I can get out of here," because she didn't want to talk to him more than 5 minutes.
She's just mean.
Yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, he's in the car driving home. He turns on his cell phone to see what the instructions are, and then he just starts hearing all this. And of course, after this is over, he finds in his medical records they've charted that he has STDs. He's heard all this. He gets a lawyer and he sues, and they settled for $500,000.
Holy
And his public
cow.
record is in the Washington Post.
Yeah, it's out there now. All right, and they settled, meaning that it must have been for the doctors just to settle and not fight. This, again, by the way, his colonoscopy went fine. There was no physical damage to him, right?
Correct.
I mean, everything was fine.
Correct.
And as I heard what you described to me, the fact that they started saying he has syphilis and the fact that it got on the chart, that bothered me. Now, the fact that they started calling him names and things like this, I don't know. What was the worst of what happened here, in your opinion? I mean, it was all bad, but I mean, the damage, okay, if you're under anesthesia and a doctor says, "Oh, this guy's, a buffoon or something," and you hear that, I don't, que sera.
Well, what's the worst part? I guess it depends on who you are. If you're completely vulnerable, laying out in essence naked under a gown, and someone is saying that you've got an STD, and someone's joking about it, and someone's saying, "I'm going to punch you and man you up" when you're under anesthesia, or someo's saying, calls you a retard.
But the only people hearing this are 3 or 4. I'm not trying to defend this doctor, get me straight on this, but I'm trying to figure out damages here. The only people hearing this, except once it got on the file, that was different, but are those 3 doctors in there, okay? It's not like this is something that aired on Channel 5 and everyone heard these things and you could really say, yeah, I'm humiliated and damaged, and wherever I go publicly now, they look at me and go, "There's the guy with syphilis." This was just 3 doctors in the privacy, I suppose, of the OR, and they were saying completely inappropriate things. But the damages.
How do you know they weren't snickering about this afterwards with some of their coworkers? And never got.
But you'd have to prove that, wouldn't you?
Well, you would, and maybe that's what the settlement involved. Is what kind of proof would that show? Can this man seriously go to this hospital ever again?
Oh, okay.
Can this man ever have a colonoscopy in peace again?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't like that happening to me either.
When you're talking about damages, you ask the question. That's what I'm talking about. You cannot. in my opinion, go through what he went through without having some lasting damage, and in particular, any peace of mind for any medical procedure where he's put under anesthesia. Yeah. And what I was telling you before the show is I think you're going to see more of these types of episodes take place. We know about the selfie that was taken during Joan Rivers' surgery. You and I talked about that at length.
Joan Rivers, who died after the surgical procedure, and someone taking a selfie during that. That's ridiculous.
Right. So I think what you're going to see is as cell phones are used more and more often to record events, video or audio recording, you're going to find that things people never knew occurred do occur, and then the question is, you know, what are going to be the consequences?
Well, ORs are going to take steps, obviously, and they made a mistake. I don't understand why his pants were in the OR with him with that phone in it, but, you know, my son was born 15 years ago, and during the delivery process, I was allowed to bring in my little Hi8 camera to record it, okay? My understanding, and I could be wrong on this, but I don't believe that hospitals allow that anymore.
They won't. This must have been either an oversight on the part of someone who was responsible for making sure that he didn't have his clothes in there with him, or something else. But the point, Nick, if he hadn't have recorded this and he hadn't discovered it, he would have had an STD in his medical records for however long.
Yeah, that's bad when it was recorded down. You know, the worst thing about this, aside from how it was bad for this particular individual, is you see this, and this is now in my head. And whenever I have another procedure, and I've had a colonoscopy, as I said, where I was knocked out, and I wonder, oh, I wonder what they were saying about me. I mean, anyone who goes to the hospital now that saw this case is going to wonder. And you know as well as I do, doctors talk. I mean, you hear about how in ORs, sometimes they'll play music. I'm not saying they always say bad things, but I mean, there's chit-chat, there's music sometimes playing in the OR if that relaxes them during procedures and things like this. You imagine this has been going on forever.
Yeah, but this woman, this anesthesiologist, who, by the way, was fired and now she's working somewhere in Florida, who knows what she's doing. She's vicious. I mean, there's a difference, I think, between doctors chit-chatting and lawyers chit-chat, too. We all do, even about our litigants, we talk about it. But this is vicious, mean-spirited, and anytime it causes someone to have an STD put in their chart, and you know it's not easy to remove things from the chart, Nick, once they're in there, that deserves a serious remedy, and he got one here.
And he got one, maybe $500,000. Remind folks of that story a long time ago where a doctor tattooed his name on someone's liver.
Yeah, during a procedure.
That again?
Yeah.
And how did they discover it?
You know, I can't remember, Nick. They opened it
must
back,
have reopened
or someone spilled the beans. It was one or the other, but it was
so
again. That's somebody that's just
having a procedure done, and they're like, just for kicks, and it didn't cause him any.
It didn't cause any damage.
But he wrote his initials on the guy's liver.
Correct, and then closed him up, and presumably thinking no one would ever see it. I think actually someone told on that doctor, and that's how it was discovered. But in any event, they're just liberties. They're just things you can't do. They're lines you can't cross, and that's one of them.
Be real clear before we go to the break. In your mind, okay, the line, and what should the reasonable expectation be for any patient of a doctor? I guess that's pretty broad, but is it to be treated with respect? Does that mean, to what level? Aside from, the techniques they use to treat you, and you expect them to do that properly, what do you expect when you go to the doctor? What should be the basic standard be?
Well, the basic standard is for the doctor to be professional.
Okay. And not all doctors have great bedside manners. Some better than others based on their personality. That doesn't mean they may be quiet. They may be a bit grumpy. But
professional means professional. You don't have to have good bedside manner to be professional. There are plenty of doctors who don't have good bedside manner who are extremely effective professionals.
Competent. Yes, sure.
Just the same thing I would expect of myself with a client is to be professional. But the second thing is you expect the doctor to comply with the standard of care. What is the acceptable standard for treating a condition? If the doctor complies with it, it's basic. I mean, it's not high, Nick. It's just a basic level of care. That's what you expect. And if you get provided care that's below that standard and it causes severe injury, then you have a claim.
And respect as well, then, because could you make the argument that the basic level of care with this guy in the colonoscopy, he got the basic colonoscopy and there was no problem. They did that and that was appropriate. The basic level of care here that was violated was that and the biggie is they put that he had an STD on his chart. But let's just take that STD on the chart out of the picture. If that wasn't there, it would still be egregious, wouldn't it?
Yeah, but you know what, Nick? I don't think that really was a case of medical negligence. I know they called it that. I think that was really a defamation case. That's libel. Or slander. Libel by putting it in the medical records, and slander by slandering him to other people. That's really what the gut of the case was.
I agree with you. I think you're right. Let's take a quick call from Erica. Hi, Erica.
Hi.
Hey, good morning. What can we do for you?
I was wanting to know how long it is in 81, I had a blood transfusion, and the result is lupus. Now I can't work, and I was wondering if I could still sue the hospital or it's out of time, ran out of time.
Okay, and all right, and you're saying the blood transfusion's what led you to get lupus?
Yes.
Okay. Well, 81, obviously it's past it. Now, you've said in the past sometimes if there's some kind of treatment and it manifests itself later, you know, beyond 1 year, are there exceptions to the 1 year statute of limitations?
Yeah, there's two. Well, there are a number of exceptions to the statute of limitations, but the ones that will apply where you have no time limit is A, if they leave an object in your body. It's called the foreign object except. If they leave a sponge or scissors or some other instrument in your body, you can bring a claim no matter how long it takes.
That makes sense.
Because the patient wouldn't know unless it was discovered. And then the second would be fraud, which has been interpreted by our Supreme Court to mean if a doctor actively conceals information about a condition or about a treatment to, in essence, hide it from you when they had a duty to disclose it, in that situation as well, there's no time limit provided that you file the lawsuit within 1 year that you discover he's concealed something from you.
Okay, so in this case, probably not. First of all, proving that the lupus came from a blood transfusion in 81 would be extraordinarily difficult.
I would say there is about a 99% chance she's got no claim.
Yeah, likely just too much time has passed. 1981 is such a long, long time. But at the time, who knows? If you could have made that link, possibly so, but not likely now. It's just a tough thing. Let's go to Joe. Joe, you had a follow-up question. Go ahead.
Yes, I did. I heard something about the legislator putting some kind of a cap on what you could sue a nursing home corporation for. Does Mr. Kelly have any answer for that?
I do, and he's right. Joe's right. There is a cap. There's two caps. The first cap is there's a $750,000 cap on all non-economic damages. That's pain and suffering, loss of enjoyment of life, loss of a spouse, loss of services from your spouse, and that applies to every case, not just medical negligence cases or nursing home cases. That applies to every case. Auto wreck, product liability, you name it, it applies. There's a second cap. It's the $1 million cap. It's another $250,000 if the patient or the client has been paralyzed, has lost one arm and one leg, has been burned over 40% of their body, or was the custodian of a minor child. Those are the four exceptions where you can get up to $1 million, but that's it. And what the cap has done, it has eliminated a whole swath of cases that lawyers would take, particularly in the medical negligence area, because if these cases are notoriously expensive, you know that, Nick. You can spend up to $100,000
and everything.
Yeah.
Sure.
If you've got someone who's elderly, who's not working, or you have someone who's on Social Security disability and has no lost wages, and they've suffered an injury that doesn't require a lot of medical expenses, but it's bad, like, you know, we've talked about the gentleman who became impotent because he went to the sex clinic.
That's right.
The doctors have more, and the hospitals have more opportunity to litigate those cases because they can cap their risk. They know that they won't have to pay beyond a certain amount of money. And what it's done, in essence, is taken power away from the juries and given it to the government.
Yeah, well, you worry about caps, and maybe in some cases caps are justified, but it just makes me think that big business or hospitals or whatever can say to themselves, well, we're going to make this much money anyway by doing all these, and if once in a blue moon someone is wronged, it's capped anyway, we can afford it.
Exactly.
And that's what bothers me.
That's the calculation.
I want them to do the right thing, but you know, oh, it's capped, we're protected, and hey, we'll just pay the damage here. It's not going to be $750, it'll be short of that even if they get the case to court trial. You
remember they sold this to the people, basically saying we can't trust the juries to make the right decisions in these cases. That's how it was sold, and I'll never forget what Fred Thompson said. You remember Senator Thompson said, we trust juries every day to sentence people to death.
Yeah.
If we can trust them to sentence people to death, we can trust them to set damages in a civil case. I mean, does that not make perfect sense?
When that argument came out, and I applauded Fred Thompson for saying what he did, and he's a fine attorney, and he knows his stuff. He's exactly right. That was an absurd way to sell it to the public, which apparently bought it. All right, we can't trust the jury. You are the jury. Our entire judicial system is based on trusting a jury, as you saw in the Vanderbilt rape case, where you have a juror that can't be trusted and everything gets thrown out. Trust is everything with the jury. And when there's the rare case, like in the Vanderbilt case, where someone is fingered for it, they take action. It's taken very, very seriously, and it doesn't happen often like that. We'll take a break and be back with more of your calls right after this.